After I refused to give my husband my inheritance, he invited me to a family meeting. When I arrived, they had lawyers ready to force me to sign it over. But the moment they handed me the papers, I smiled and said, "Funny, I brought someone too." The phone call came at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, jarring me from sleep with its shrill urgency. Mr. Harrison's voice crackled through the receiver, formal yet tinged with something I couldn't quite place, sympathy mixed with disbelief. "Mrs. Claire Whitmore Reed, I'm calling regarding your grandfather's will reading. There's been, well, let's just say there are some unexpected developments. Can you be at my office by 10 this morning?" I sat up in bed, my heart still heavy from Grandpa Edward's funeral just 3 days prior. The smell of lilies from the service seemed to linger in my hair, a constant reminder of the man who'd raised me after my parents died in that car accident when I was 12. Colin stirred beside me, his arm reaching across the empty space where I'd been lying. "What's wrong?" he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. "The lawyer wants to see me about Grandpa's will," I whispered, already swinging my legs out of bed. Something about Mr. Harrison's tone made my stomach twist with anticipation and dread. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing these stories that matter. If you believe that women deserve financial independence and protection from manipulation, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more women who need to hear this. Now let's see how this unfolds. 2 hours later, I found myself sitting in the mahogany-paneled office that smelled of old books and leather, facing a document that would change everything. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat nervously, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he read the words that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. "To my beloved granddaughter, Claire Elizabeth Whitmore, I leave my entire estate, including all properties, investments, and liquid assets, totaling approximately $2.4 million. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd expected maybe a small keepsake, perhaps the old pocket watch he'd always carried. But everything? The sprawling Victorian house on Maple Street where I'd spent my teenage years, the hardware store that had been in our family for 3 generations, the investment portfolio he'd built over decades of careful planning, all of it was mine. "I don't understand," I stammered, my hands trembling as I reached for the thick envelope marked with my name in Grandpa's distinctive handwriting. "What about my cousins? Uncle Richard's children? Surely he meant to divide it among the family?" Mr. Harrison shook his head gravely. "Your grandfather was very specific, Claire. He updated this will 6 months ago, and I can assure you he was of completely sound mind. There's also a personal letter for you." With shaking fingers, I tore open the envelope. Grandpa's familiar script filled the cream-colored stationery, each word carefully chosen in the way that had always made his bedtime stories so magical. "My dearest Claire, if you're reading this, then I've finally gone to join your grandmother in whatever comes next. Don't cry for me, sweetheart. I've lived a full life, and knowing you has been its greatest joy. I'm leaving everything to you because you're the only one who ever saw past the money. When you were 16 and I offered to buy you a car, you asked if we could fix up the old Ford in the garage instead because it had character and stories to tell. When your cousins would visit and immediately start calculating what they might inherit, you'd sit with me on the porch swing and ask about my childhood, about your grandmother's garden, about the dreams I'd given up to build this fortune. You have a good heart, Claire, but I worry about that husband of yours. I've watched how his eyes light up when he thinks about money, how he steers conversations toward my business ventures and investment strategies. Be careful who you trust with this gift, my dear. Not everyone who claims to love you loves you for the right reasons. Make this inheritance count. Build something beautiful with it. And remember, you don't owe anyone anything, no matter what they might say. All my love, Grandpa Edward." I pressed the letter to my chest, tears streaming down my cheeks as the full weight of his words settled over me. He'd seen something I'd been too trusting to recognize. The memory of Colin's behavior at family gatherings suddenly took on a different hue. The way he'd laugh just a little too loudly at Grandpa's jokes, how he'd volunteer to help with yard work whenever there might be talk of wills or estate planning. The drive home felt surreal, like moving through a dream where everything looked the same but felt fundamentally different. I kept glancing at the certified check in my purse, the numbers almost too large to comprehend. $2.4 million. It was more money than I'd ever imagined having, more than Colin and I earned combined in 5 years of marriage. Colin was waiting in the kitchen when I walked through the door, his laptop open on the granite countertop we'd spent months saving to afford. He looked up expectantly, that boyish smile I'd fallen in love with 7 years ago spreading across his face. "So, what did the old man leave you?" "I'm betting it's that antique jewelry collection. Your grandmother's pearls were always gorgeous on you." I set my purse down carefully, studying his expression. There was something eager in his eyes, a brightness that reminded me uncomfortably of Grandpa's warnings. "Actually, he left me everything, Colin. The entire estate." The coffee mug slipped from his fingers, shattering against the tile floor in an explosion of ceramic and dark liquid. For a moment he just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't quite process the words. "Everything?" he whispered, and I heard something in his voice I'd never noticed before, calculation mixed with excitement. "You mean the house, the business, the investments?" "All of it." I bent to pick up the larger pieces of the broken mug, needing something to do with my hands. "Mr. Harrison said it's worth about $2.4 million total." Colin's laugh echoed through the kitchen, bright and slightly manic. "Claire, do you realize what this means? We're set for life. We can pay off the mortgage, buy that cabin we've always talked about, maybe start that consulting business I've been dreaming about. This changes everything." But as I looked up at him from where I knelt on the floor, surrounded by fragments of broken ceramic, all I could think about was Grandpa's letter burning like a brand in my purse. The way Colin's mind had immediately jumped to "we" and "our plans" sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the spilled coffee soaking through my jeans. Something fundamental had shifted in that moment, though I wouldn't understand the full scope of it until much later. The inheritance hadn't just changed my financial situation. It had revealed truths about my marriage that I'd been too trusting, too in love, or perhaps too afraid to see. As Colin continued talking excitedly about investment opportunities and joint ventures, his voice fading into background noise, I realized that Grandpa's greatest gift wasn't the money at all. It was the clarity to finally see the man I'd married for who he really was. The text message came on a Thursday afternoon while I was reorganizing Grandpa's study, trying to make sense of decades of financial documents and personal letters. Colin's name flashed on my phone screen. "Mom's making Sunday dinner. Family gathering at 2 p.m. Don't be late." Something about the tone felt wrong. Colin never used periods in his texts, and he certainly never referred to his mother's casual dinners as family gatherings. But after a week of increasingly tense conversations about the inheritance, conversations that always ended with me saying I needed more time to think, I figured maybe he was trying to smooth things over with a normal family afternoon. I should have trusted my instincts. Sunday arrived with an unseasonably gray sky, the kind of weather that makes everything feel heavy and ominous. I'd spent the morning at Grandpa's grave, telling him about the strange tension that had settled over my marriage like a fog I couldn't quite navigate through. The roses I'd placed on his headstone seemed to nod in the gentle breeze, as if he were listening, warning me to be careful. Colin had left early that morning, claiming he needed to help his mother prepare, but when I pulled into the familiar driveway of the modest ranch house where he'd grown up, I noticed several cars I didn't recognize. A sleek black sedan sat next to Evan's pickup truck, and behind it, a silver BMW that definitely didn't belong to anyone in Colin's family. The front door opened before I could knock, and Colin's smile seemed stretched too tight across his face. "Claire, perfect timing. Everyone's here." "Everyone." I stepped inside, immediately noticing that the usual warmth of his mother's home felt different. The living room had been rearranged, chairs pulled into a circle around the coffee table like some kind of intervention setup. "Colin, what's going on?" His mother, Sandra, emerged from the kitchen with a strained expression, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Oh, honey, the boys thought it would be good to have some help with all that paperwork you inherited. You know how confusing legal documents can be." That's when I saw them. Two men in expensive suits sitting on the couch like they owned the place, briefcases open and documents spread across the coffee table in neat, organized piles. Colin's brother Evan stood near the window, avoiding eye contact, his usual easy grin replaced by something that looked almost apologetic. "Claire, meet Robert Hendricks and James Morrison," Colin said, his voice taking on a tone I'd never heard before, authoritative, almost commanding. "They specialize in estate management and inheritance optimization. I thought they could help us figure out the best way to handle Grandpa Edward's estate." The word "us" hit me like a slap. I looked around the room, taking in the scene with growing clarity. This wasn't a family dinner. This was an ambush. I don't remember asking for help, I said carefully, my voice steadier than I felt. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but years of watching Grandpa negotiate business deals had taught me never to show weakness when cornered. Robert Hendricks stood, extending his hand with practiced charm. Mrs. Reed, your husband has explained the complexity of the inheritance. We're here simply to streamline the process, make things easier for both of you. Estate management can be overwhelming for someone without experience. The condescension in his voice made my skin crawl. I shook his hand briefly, noting how his grip lingered just a moment too long, how his smile never reached his eyes. These weren't family friends offering assistance. These were sharks Colin had brought to circle me. We've prepared some documents that will establish a joint trust, James Morrison added, gesturing to the papers spread across the table. It's really the most sensible approach for married couples. Full transparency, shared decision-making, optimal tax benefits. I moved closer to the coffee table, scanning the documents. Even without my reading glasses, I could see enough legal jargon to understand what they were really asking for. Transfer of assets, joint control, immediate liquidity options. They wanted me to sign over control of Grandpa's inheritance to a trust that Colin would co-manage. This is very thoughtful, I said slowly, picking up one of the documents. But I haven't had time to review everything with my own attorney yet. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Colin's jaw tightened, and I caught Evan shifting uncomfortably near the window. Sandra had disappeared back into the kitchen, clearly wanting no part of whatever was about to unfold. Claire, we don't need to complicate this, Colin said, his voice carrying an edge I'd only heard once before. During our worst fight 3 years ago when I'd questioned a large withdrawal from our savings account. These gentlemen have handled hundreds of estates. They know what they're doing. I'm sure they do, I replied, setting the document back down. But Grandpa left the inheritance to me specifically. I think I owe it to his memory to make sure I understand every detail before making any decisions. Robert Hendricks exchanged a glance with Colin that made my stomach turn. There was something calculating in that look. Something that suggested this conversation had been rehearsed. Mrs. Reed, Hendricks said, his tone becoming more insistent. Time is a factor here. Market conditions, tax implications, delay can be costly. Your husband is simply looking out for your best interests. Our best interests, Colin corrected, and there it was. The truth laid bare. This wasn't about helping me manage an inheritance. This was about Colin getting his hands on money that had never been intended for him. I looked around the room again, seeing everything with crystalline clarity. The arranged furniture, the professional documents, the way everyone was positioned like they were closing in on prey. Even Evan, who'd always been kind to me, couldn't meet my eyes. But Colin had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated me. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, pretending to check the time. You know what? You're absolutely right about getting professional help with this. Colin's face brightened, thinking he'd won. I knew you'd see reason. I smiled, feeling a surge of satisfaction as I moved toward the front door. That's why I asked my attorney to stop by. She should be here any minute. The blood drained from Colin's face. Your attorney? Deborah Lane, I said, opening the door as if on cue. She specializes in inheritance protection and fraud prevention. Funny thing, she had some very interesting insights about husbands who tried to manipulate their wives into signing over inherited assets. Deborah stepped through the doorway, her silver hair perfectly styled, her presence commanding immediate respect. At 62, she'd built a reputation as one of the most formidable estate attorneys in the state, and her sharp blue eyes missed nothing as they swept the room. Good afternoon, everyone, she said pleasantly, though her tone carried an unmistakable authority. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. The silence that followed was deafening. Colin's confidence cracked like ice under pressure, and suddenly he looked exactly like what he was, a man caught in the middle of betraying his wife's trust in broad daylight. As Deborah's presence filled Sandra's living room like a force field of legal authority, my mind began racing backward through 7 years of marriage, connecting dots I'd been too trusting, or perhaps too afraid, to see. The confrontation unfolding before me wasn't just about the inheritance. It was the culmination of a pattern I'd been living with for so long that it had become my normal. Standing there watching Colin's face cycle through shock, anger, and desperation, I suddenly remembered our 3rd anniversary dinner at Romano's. I'd been excited to surprise him with news that I'd gotten a promotion at the marketing firm, complete with a 15% salary increase. But instead of celebrating, Colin had immediately started calculating what we could do with the extra money. "This is perfect timing, babe," he'd said, cutting into his steak without even congratulating me first. "I've been looking at this investment opportunity, cryptocurrency mining. We could use your raise as seed money." When I'd hesitated, suggesting we should discuss major financial decisions together, his smile had faltered for just a moment. "Claire, you know I'm better with numbers than you are. Trust me on this one." That phrase, "trust me," had become his go-to response whenever I questioned anything financial. And somehow he'd made me believe that questioning him meant I didn't believe in us. The memory of that conversation felt different now, tainted by the understanding that Colin had never seen my success as something to celebrate, but rather as another resource to manage. Just like he was trying to manage Grandpa's inheritance. "Mrs. Reed," Deborah's voice brought me back to the present moment. "Perhaps we should review these documents these gentlemen have prepared?" I watched as she moved to the coffee table with the precision of a surgeon, her experienced eyes scanning the papers that Colin's hired attorneys had laid out like a trap. But while she read, my mind continued its painful journey through the archaeology of my marriage. There was the Mexico vacation that had appeared on our credit card statement, a $4,000 charge I'd discovered while paying bills. When I'd confronted Colin about it, he'd laughed it off, saying it was a surprise he'd been planning for months. "You're always stressed about work," he'd said, pulling me into his arms with that boyish grin that used to make my knees weak. "I thought we could use some time together. Don't you want to spend time with your husband?" The guilt in that question had been masterful. How could I be upset about a romantic gesture? How could I complain about my husband wanting to sweep me away on a dream vacation? But I'd never agreed to spend that money. We'd been saving for a down payment on a house, and that $4,000 had wiped out months of careful budgeting. Even worse was the BMW incident from 2 years ago. I'd come home from work to find a gleaming silver sedan in our driveway, Colin leaning against it with keys dangling from his finger like he'd won the lottery. "Surprise!" he'd called out, his excitement infectious. "I got us a car." Us. I'd walked around the vehicle, noting the pristine interior, the technology package, the premium sound system. "Colin, we already have a car. And we definitely don't have BMW money. It's a lease," he'd explained as if that made everything reasonable. "And it's in your name because your credit score is higher. The payments are totally manageable." Manageable for whom? I'd wondered but hadn't said aloud. Instead, I'd found myself making excuses for why we needed a luxury car, why it made sense to stretch our budget, why Colin's happiness was worth the financial stress that kept me awake at night. But the crypto incident had been the worst betrayal of all, though I hadn't recognized it as such at the time. Grandpa had given us $8,000 for roof repairs after a particularly bad storm season. The money had come with explicit instructions: "Make sure you fix those shingles properly, Claire. I don't want you and Colin dealing with water damage." I'd assumed Colin would call the roofing company we'd gotten estimates from. Instead, he'd deposited the check and told me he'd found a better investment opportunity. "Cryptocurrency is the future, Claire," he'd said over dinner, his eyes bright with the fervor of a convert. "My buddy Jake made $30,000 in 6 months. If we put $4,000 into Bitcoin now, we could double it by Christmas." "But what about the roof? We'll use the profits to fix the roof and still have money left over. It's a win-win." The roof never got fixed that year. The cryptocurrency investment had crashed within 2 months, taking half of Grandpa's gift with it. We'd ended up patching the worst leaks with tarps and prayer, waiting until the following spring when I'd quietly used my bonus money to hire contractors. Grandpa never asked about the roof directly, but I'd caught him looking up at the ceiling during his last visit, his weathered hands tracing water stains that shouldn't have been there. The disappointment in his eyes had cut deeper